Okay, we're going to look at difficult people in under 8 minutes. So the first thing I would say about difficult people is that I've got a way of remembering this that it amuses me. Obviously, we don't really hope they're going to die or anything, but I think it's really useful to realise that there are levels of difficultness. So the first one is, are they just different to you? And very often the people we find difficult are just different. They like to go at a different speed to us. Perhaps they're more interested in detail or less interested in detail than we are. And it's not that one of us is right or wrong, they're just different. So with people like that, really it's about adapting to them, and perhaps we should be more flexible. Now, the second type of difficult person that we might encounter is people whose skills are incomplete. So let's say there's somebody who turns up late to meetings. They're basically a good person. They mean well, maybe they're really creative or whatever, but they just turn up late to meetings because their skills are incomplete, and we find that annoying. We find them difficult. Now, that doesn't mean they're a bad person. Again, we could just adapt to them. So we could bring some work with us to do while we're waiting for them when they're late. We could try to change the person's behaviour. Now, a good format, if you do want to change their behaviour, I would recommend the 4-step process. And the 4-step process involves saying, I understand. This might be something like, I know you've got a very busy job at the moment, or you've got a lot of projects on, and so it can be difficult sometimes to fit in meetings with me. But the second step is, I feel. It's very frustrating for me when I've organised everybody else to be here and then you don't turn up, or it's embarrassing in front of customers when I arrange a meeting and you turn up late. Or you have to put a bit of emotion in there because they can't ignore your emotions. They can't argue with your emotions, but also they can't ignore your emotions. So you need to put some feeling into it. Some people find that step difficult. And then the third step is what you want them to do. So we need to make it positive rather than nagging. So we say, so would it be possible for you to plan to arrive 5 minutes early? Or could you put it in your diary as a reminder? Or whatever it is we want them to do, even just to promise, to commit to being on time. Or whatever other part of their behaviour we want us to change. We say what we want them to do differently. And finally, you ask them, is that okay? Is that reasonable for me to ask? Can you see it from my point of view? Now, I know there's a risk that they'll say no, but if they say yes, it means you've got them. And if they say no, you can always go round again and you can ask them why. And if they say, well, I've got a baby at home and I'm not getting enough sleep and that's affecting things, you can say, well, I totally understand. I know it's really difficult, but it's really affecting my work and it's affecting the customers, and therefore something has to change. So the 4-step process is very powerful, particularly the middle 2 steps are very powerful. And then you've got this kind of soft exterior of, I do understand, but I'm not happy, I want you to change. Could you do that for me? So it's quite a clever format, that. And one other point about this is that we can do it for the one-off, or we can do it for the habit. So even if they've been late several times, you can pick them up on the one-off and say, you were late for today's meeting. It was embarrassing. It would be really great if you didn't do that. But you can also challenge them on the habit. And you can say, you're quite often late for my meetings, and that's given me a problem, and this is what I want, etc. So what I would do is give them 1 or 2 chances, and then the third time they do it, challenge the one-off. And then if they keep doing it, you can challenge them on the habit. You can even challenge them on the fact that you've challenged them and they promised they would do it. They said yes, but they didn't do it. And so you can say, well, look, we had this conversation. You said you'd do it, but you still haven't. So how do we make this happen? So basically, once they've said yes, you've got them. But what about my third level of difficultness? Worse than being just different, which is not really a crime at all. Worse than being a little bit incomplete, which we all are, to be honest. This is people who are genuinely evil. Now, I think there's only a very small number of people who don't mean well. Most people mean well, but there are some people who really don't. And the common thing that these people do is that they are games players. Now, sometimes they don't realise they're playing these games. Sometimes they do and they enjoy it. But either way, let's have a quick look at games players. Now, the games triangle, sometimes called the drama triangle, involves 3 positions: persecutor, victim, and rescuer. So there are 2 people playing this, you and the games player, but there are 3 positions they can be in. And there are all sorts of games. So there are things like Now I've Got You, where your boss says they're a rescuer, any problem come to me. And then when you do come to them with a problem, they persecute you and say, well, I can't believe you've done that. And then you're the victim. Now, there are loads of other games. I'll just mention 2 others. One of them is why don't you, yes, but. So this is where your boss or the games player comes to you with a problem. You try to rescue them with solutions. They keep saying, oh no, that won't work. They're the victim. I've got this problem. They reject your suggestions. And eventually, after they've rejected several of your attempts to rescue them, they say, you're no help, and they persecute you. And you've gone from the rescuer to the victim. Now, one more example of a games player is only trying to help you. And this is where they persecute you, but they pretend to be a rescuer. So they say a bit of advice, or, I wouldn't do it like that. So they're making you the victim, but they're doing it from a rather clever rescuer angle rather than a persecutor angle. Now, the thing with games is it's quite hard to work out, are they rescuing me? Are they persecuting me? They say they're the victim, but surely I'm the victim in this, aren't I? And whenever it starts to feel a bit gamey, don't worry about trying to define the game. Just realise that it is a game. And then you've got certain options. Ideally, you would avoid games players, but at work you can't always do that. So I think what I would recommend is the first level is the 4-step process and say, I don't like it when you say that. I don't like it when you tell me I've done it wrong after I've done it. So I don't like it when is the first approach you can use. But you can call them out on the game, and this is a bit more to do with pointing out the habit. And this is where you say, have you noticed that quite often you criticise people behind their back? Or have you noticed that quite often you give out advice, but it's after it's happened? Or have you noticed that you quite often say yes, but, and you refuse to be rescued? So this is where you're pointing out the game. What they'll say, by the way, is, I don't. And then you can say, well, shall I point it out next time you do it? And they'll go, yeah, all right then. And then they won't play that game anymore with you. So have you noticed is a good approach, but remember that it's quite a heavy thing to do because you're saying to somebody that they've got a habit that probably lots of people have noticed and that most people don't like. That's quite a big thing to say to a person. So try I don't like it when first and go for have you noticed if you have to. There's one more variant of this which I really like actually, and that's where you say, I notice, I interpret, am I right? So you say, I noticed that during the meeting you've been looking at your phone a lot. I interpret that to mean that you've got some other things that are going on that are more important than the meeting, or maybe you don't even want to be at the meeting. Am I right? And they can either say, well, yes, actually, I don't want to be at this meeting, which is fine, you can sort that out. Or they'll say, oh, sorry, yeah, I won't do that anymore. And they'll put the phone away. Or, I notice you quite often turn up late to my meeting. I interpret that to mean that the meeting's not important. Am I right? So that's another tactic you can use to confront somebody who's behaving badly. So there we are. That's a quick dip into the world of difficult people in under 8 minutes.